Dylan, does that work? Hello, thank you for everyone for coming to our first brown bag lunch. First of all, Dylan, can you hear me? Yes, great. So this is the first in a series that we hope to do fairly frequently. In fact, the next one will be in a couple of weeks, talking about how to monitor pantographs. But today we're going to just give a brief update on what the High Speed Rail Association is about, what our goals are, and what the opportunities are to get some movement in DC. First, a little bit of discussion for those who aren't familiar with us. The High Speed Rail Alliance is a nonprofit. We're supported through membership contributions from people like you and many other people who all share the desire to have fast, frequent, comfortable, safe, and affordable rail transportation, linking lots of places to lots of other places. I've been the executive director of the association, or the alliance, since 2001. And we recently have changed our name from the Midwest High Speed Rail Association to the High Speed Rail Alliance in anticipation of some really big changes that could happen in DC and the desire to help influence those throughout. So the agenda is, again, a brief introduction on why, what our philosophy is, what's happening in DC, and then a question and answer period. Throughout the program, if you like, you can use the question and answer function. I am watching it as I go, probably not well, definitely read through them at the end. And Dylan, our program manager, is watching them in order to highlight things. So, given that, we'll get started. Our association started in 1993 as a group of 15 to 20 people. There was a mix of folks at that time, driven in large part by business people that were tired of flying to places like Detroit and St. Louis. Excuse me. We recognized we noticed a small thing, which was that Madrid and Seville had just opened. And Madrid and Seville are about the distance of Chicago to St. Louis. In 1993, they did that trip in 2 hours and 20 minutes. And we had the basic question, well, if they can do it there, why can't we do it here? We've learned over the years it's not as easy as that, but we've made significant progress through support of our members and partners. I took this picture at the celebration of 25 years of high-speed rail in Spain. If you were to think of Chicago to St. Louis and Madrid to Seville is the same, Ciudad Real would be about at Bloomington Normal or Champaign-Urbana, both which are university towns, and Ciudad Real is a big university town. The conference was held in Ciudad Real. About a third of the attendees spent the night in Madrid and took the train into the multi-day conference. And we had the keynote address in Seville. And that's just not something you can do in the United States because we don't have high-speed rail. We have just cars and planes, which don't have that ability to connect people or companies or universities or the critical economic assets that we have spread about the country. So this is really the reason why we are in this. And even today, we've had a major crisis where a lot of folks have switched to working remotely, as we're doing here now. But that doesn't mean that we will always be this separated. And it certainly doesn't mean you can conduct everything over the internet that you can do in person. This is an ad from when they opened up the Taiwan high-speed line. Basically on the left, you've got before high speed, which is the grandparents' home for the weekend alone, and after high speed, where you've got all of the kids and grandkids coming to visit. And so it really does connect people in a way that you can't do over the internet. And so travel's always going to be important. It will be different. There might be less business travel, which means we need to focus on really getting volumes on the train as they do in Europe, as opposed to the Acela Express, which is focused on high price tickets. But certainly travel is going to be highly important. And trains are a great way to make that travel work. This is kind of a unique high-speed train. Germany has a bar car and a dining car on their high-speed trains. This was taken at the beginning of a trip from Berlin to Frankfurt. And you can see here what makes train travel different. You can work, you can relax, read a newspaper, eat, or if you look at the guys down on the right, get really drunk. So it's really a different way to travel, and it's a lot more affordable than expanding highways, and it's significantly more affordable for people to use it over driving or flying. But what do we need to do to make this a reality in the States at the federal level? And I believe that there are top 3 priorities. The first is the very simple thing: we need money, and it's probably going to take $10 billion or more a year to really get the program going. So that's the appropriation. And the appropriation is when Congress decides this is the money we choose to spend this year. We need to authorize the existing programs that are out there. They're pretty good. They can be improved. But even if we just went with the programs we had today and reauthorized them, we'd be able to build high-speed rail. We've got a much more in-depth paper on what we would like to see improved by those programs, but that's the second. And so the current authorization ends at the end of this fiscal year, September 30th, but it's very unlikely that they would have something in place to replace it. It'll probably just be extended. And the last time it was extended 10 or 15 times before they came up with a new one. But that's the current thing in play. And one thing that I view very differently than many folks is we need to start looking very differently at how passenger carriers interact with the Class 1s and how the government interacts with the Class 1 railroads. I have a difficult time imagining, say, example, the Ford Motor Company having constant arguments in public and in courts about the quality of the engine blocks that their sub-vendor is providing. We need to find some way that the Class 1 railroads will say, yes, we think that this is a good business, the same way that defense contractors think that building things for the federal government is a good business, or that highway contractors think that building highways for the states is a good business. We need to figure out how to get there. Not sure how that happens yet, but it's certainly something we need to work on. So those are our big overarching goals for what a federal program would look like. Of course, there's a lot more detail, and we'll be releasing that as we go. But that's the overall. And to get there, we're going to have to unite a very large group of people And these people need to be spread across 50 states. They need to represent both rural and urban districts. They need to represent both business and labor. And we need to figure out a way that we can get folks together to say, we are going to do a federal railroad expansion program. And that expansion program, in my mind, causes the freight railroads to haul a lot more high value freight that is going by truck today. It interacts better with the airline industry. It has a mix of new high-speed lines where trains are going 200 miles an hour plus, and probably in the 20% range, and then in the 80% range, this really stronger partnership with the Class 1 railroads to run high-frequency trains, 80, 90 miles an hour, but much more high frequency and 95% on time, working in a big system. And unfortunately, our language that we've used as passenger rail advocates doesn't create that cohesion. It actually drives people apart. And so we've been working on how do you bring these people together into one coalition that moves this forward. And we've developed an approach called the integrated network approach. And for those who have been with us for a while, this is the first time you've heard integrated network approach. We've been calling it the phased network approach, but changed it to integrated to make it clear that all of the pieces are very valuable and they all need to work together. And the key crux of this is integrating it. And you need to have a big picture plan. Each state should have a big picture plan, and then the federal government should have a big picture plan that shows at different levels how this is all going to interconnect. The immediate thing that we can do to make service a lot better in the short term is replace the existing trains that are out there, both on commuter railroads and much of what's on Amtrak today. Most of it is out of date. Newer trains that can go around turns faster, accelerate, decelerate faster, burn less fuel, are more attractive to customers, will drive revenue increases and reduce the costs, which makes it less affordable or less costly to run the service, which makes it more attractive and more people ride and it goes up. And then I think we need to think about three types of track. High-speed lines, urban trunk lines, and shared use lines. Railroads are incredibly flexible and you can do pieces this way and pieces that way, and depending upon your local needs, but these three categories help really explain what we need to do. So the driver in this, and this has been showed frequently, where the driver in doing the other things is the high-speed line, because it's what changes people's perceptions. It brings the volume to the rest of the system that allows you to improve the rest of the system. And it shrinks distances so much that it makes the whole system work much better. In order to do that, you probably need to build new tracks, probably on new rights of way. This is between Milan and Bologna. So they chose to build it along their autostrada, but you've got track optimized, very rigid for speed, fencing, electrification, and no highway grade crossings. And the freight is running on a separate track over on the old line. We have a new concept that we're trying to get out there called the urban trunk line, which we would consider the Northeast Corridor to be this, where you're taking a shared use line, upgrading it for much faster speeds. On the Northeast Corridor, they're going to go up to 160 fairly soon. Preferably, you've got separate freight tracks, not necessarily. The Northeast Corridor still has a lot of freight on it. You preferably, but necessarily, have local and express tracks, and it's really best if you don't have any highway grade crossings. Illinois has what could be upgraded very quickly to this standard, the Metro Electric line, which is pictured here, which is how high-speed trains can get into Chicago and if you did some further upgrades into O'Hare. And California is doing this kind of process between San Jose and San Francisco. And then the third category is shared use lines. This is the Norfolk Southern owned main line that heads east out of Chicago. In this case, this line is busy enough that there should be dedicated passenger tracks, but that process, the planning for that has started a little bit, not as fast as we would like. But in this case, the tracks are optimized for dealing with very heavy loads. You probably shouldn't go faster than 90 miles an hour on a line like this, but our regulations, there's a breakpoint in regulations at 125. And again, to point out the flexibility of this, you can electrify shared use lines, which makes it a lot easier to do that integration with high-speed lines and shared use lines in different cases. And this is where this all becomes very important in terms of integrating it. Today, the planning is primarily done in individual segments. We talk about city pairs of 100 to 300 miles apart. We talk about commuter rail or these different pieces, and the planning is all done individually. And so if you look at each individual piece alone, you don't get a lot of volume for these, and it's hard to justify each of these. And these are, I think we should go back to Milwaukee, Rockford, Chicago, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, but you get the basic point. There's two major cities and things feeding into it. If you could take a big picture approach, instead of doing it individually, you can find a lot more traffic. And now you can justify each segment of this having more frequent service, having faster service, and you get to the point where those key city pairs can probably much more easily justify building a new high-speed line. And so this is what we mean when we say integrated. Think about the long term and how it all works together so that you can figure out how to do each piece over time. California is the first to really take this approach. They've done, in 2018, they released their master plan that integrates all intercity buses and all train lines, including their commuter rail and some of their light rail lines, into a statewide plan. And it shows how the agencies, if they can cooperate and work together, can build this out over time and make it all very robust. And the key first step to making this work, if you're looking at it from a statewide integrated approach, is Bakersfield to Merced. It's in part because it's the easiest, in part because it's in the middle, in part because it's already underway. But it makes it possible, if you build this, to build the political support for digging the very expensive tunnels that you need to connect the valleys together, the Los Angeles Basin, the Central Valley, and the Silicon Valley. There's a current debate there that we need to be involved in because California really drives the nationwide conversation on high-speed rail. Right now, if you look in that center there, from Madera to a town called Shafter, that's the original segment that they are constructing right now, that they have funding to construct, in full environmental approval to construct. That's underway. The authority would like to take that into downtown Merced and downtown Bakersfield. And at those two stations, you would build completely new stations in downtown that make it incredibly easy to transfer between commuter trains in Merced and a fleet of buses in Bakersfield. And those buses would go throughout the Los Angeles area. If you don't have the big picture approach, it's hard to understand why this works. And there's a strong effort ongoing right now to shift the money that the authority would like to spend on that to commuter rail in the LA basin. We believe that that commuter rail service that they're talking about in LA should be done. They should find the money to do it, but getting Merced to Bakersfield with 220-mile-an-hour infrastructure is absolutely critical to making high-speed rail work. And so we've been working to get that message out, and we'll ramp that up fairly shortly. And we want to point out that red segment between San Francisco and San Jose, they're already electrifying it to be compatible with high-speed rail and also to create a much more modern, more effective commuter rail service. From San Jose to Merced, the environmental work is out for public comment right now, so that's moving forward very well. Bakersfield to Palmdale is out for public comment, Palmdale to Burbank, and Burbank to Anaheim will be out soon. I want to point out over here, it's not frequently thought of as part of California, but Las Vegas to Victorville, they are in the process of lining up the funding for that. Brightline is Express West is the actual company that's doing it. Brightline is the company brand name that we know the most. And they've just announced that they're starting to study building a link over the Cajon Pass down to Ontario to connect with Metrolink there. And there's also planning work underway to create the Victorville to Palmdale link. So it's very exciting progress happening in California. The challenge is getting this message out that this is happening and getting folks in California to tell Sacramento, move it forward. And if the more that we can make that positive message out in California, the more it drives getting better Amtrak service, the more it drives getting high-speed rail elsewhere, because this is the most visible project in passenger rail right now. And I'm sorry, there we go. And I want to emphasize this piece in the middle and looking at how it fits in with the existing network. So if you take Oakland, the two solid blue lines are the existing Amtrak service that the state has aggressively improved over the last couple of decades, now has 12, 16 trains a day. And then the orange and purple are the San Joaquin route. And the purple is the segment that would be replaced in the San Joaquins with high-speed rail when that line opens. The green is the connecting buses that already existed pre-COVID. This network will change in reaction to COVID. Hopefully we can persuade the state to bring it back as travel comes back. But pre-COVID, see, you already had this connected network across the entire state, and high-speed rail is enhancing this. Already in 2019, 60% of the people who used the San Joaquins connected to buses. At Bakersfield, 75% of them did. And there's an important fact there. So this really is an exciting project that they're working on to get high-speed rail there, and we need to really focus on making that happen. And then this is what they project will happen if it happens. Today on the left is without high-speed rail, what the traffic would be, and with building that segment in the valley, the ridership almost doubles. Their revenue more than doubles. And the cost to the state to operate the network goes down. And so again, high-speed lines drive everything else. And you end up with much better service on every segment of the network. Much more frequent service in the valley, going from 6 trains a day to 18. Those connecting buses will all be at 18. Better San Joaquin service north of Merced. New commuter rail service from Merced north. It becomes a very exciting project. The other project driving the nationwide debate is Texas Central. We're very excited about this project. It's moving through the regulatory process very well. on a nationwide basis, this has very important impact because it's causing the FRA to come up with new regulations for high-speed rail. It's driving the process for economic regulation at the Surface Transportation Board that needs to happen. Safety standards, regulation. This will be a project that will demonstrate that even Americans in Texas will ride high-speed rail because it will be hugely successful. They made another step forward last week when the Surface Transportation Board agreed to take jurisdiction over the project. The next step in that regard is they need to now file a formal application with the Surface Transportation Board, and that work is pretty much done and probably easy to do because of all the work they've done with the FRA on the environmental approval process. I see that Russell Sharp asked a question about when the Chicago to St. Louis line will start operating at 110 miles an hour. This is kind of this is the case, or this is the driver for how we should be doing mixed use lines. We've learned some lessons in this project. I think the chief lesson was there should have been a much bigger emphasis on increasing frequencies in the first round as opposed to just improving speeds. But again, this is driven towards getting with a better relationship between the operators and the Class 1 railroads in negotiating how this works with the Union Pacific. But it's a fantastic project. They've rebuilt the track from the ground up, brand new signaling system, new stations, new trains are on the way. There's going to be there's already been an immediate improvement in on-time performance. I remember when I first started running these trains, if it rained, you had to drop down to 10 miles an hour because the signaling system shorted out. And soon we will see faster schedules. Right now, today, or this week, they are out testing the signaling system for 110 miles an hour. I'm sorry, for 90. The first stage is 90. Hopefully that happens within the next year. 110 is a little bit more difficult. It's very interesting. We do not in this country have formal regulations for how to go faster than 90 miles an hour. The places that they do are operating under exceptions to the existing regulations. And there isn't a formal process for testing how to go faster than 90 miles an hour. So after they have some time with 90, they will begin developing the process for getting to 110. And Brightline in Florida will need to go through the same process in order to increase speeds on their line. They're planning 125. Let me see if any questions have come in. Let me answer a question from Dave Tomzik that's in the Illinois portion. He's asking what about the new trains for Illinois? A test coach was out operating on the Northeast Corridor for the last couple of months. About 50 of them are already either completed or well into construction of the new coaches. And they've been testing at the test track in Colorado. So that process is moving forward. Ted Hollander said, why do we need micromanaging regulation? We don't need micromanaging in my opinion, but we do need a balance. All industry is regulated to some degree or number. You need to balance the public interests with the private interests. Let's see if there's any others here about that specific. And Tom, I don't know about the Texas Eagle and whether it will be increased to 90 miles an hour. So, and there's some other questions we'll get back to at the end. So there's three things that we have to, right now at the federal level, work to influence. And they're all kind of interrelated and intertied, and they use similar terms, and it's really difficult to keep track of. But here's the three things. The first is, and the immediate is, Congress is in the throes right now of negotiating another, instead of stimulus, I meant to say COVID relief package. Publicly they're talking about extending the federal unemployment insurance, another direct payment to individuals, and lots of other things. MTA in New York, the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York, is pushing an effort to get another round of transit relief into that bill. Transit agencies around the country, because they have continued to run service, because it's such an essential part of our society to connect people that way. But their revenues have plummeted, and the sales tax revenues that support a lot of these have plummeted. And so there's a fiscal cliff that happens, depending upon the agency, within the next 6 months to a year. So there's a need, and again, we are talking about an integrated system. Everything works together, and if one piece isn't there, the other piece doesn't work right. So we need to be getting messages to Congress in very short order that transit needs to be in the next COVID relief bill. The other piece is reauthorization. So reauthorization is kind of like we should have these programs. This is what we should do. These are the policies around how we're going to implement these programs. That's reauthorization, or the authorization. That expires at the end of this year. And so you've seen a number of bills come out, and I'll talk about those later, that all interrelate to the debate over that. And then the third is, you always need to focus on the money, because all these things, if you don't have money, nothing else matters. You can have the best programs in the world. If you don't spend the money on it, you can't move forward. And you can also actually direct the agencies to spend money on programs that haven't been authorized. So the really important piece is the authorization, and that happens every year. And the debate over that is also happening right now. So three interrelated things, all happening at the same time, hard to keep track of. In the stimulus, I talked about, that's what they're focused on publicly, is unemployment and also filling the gaps in the state budgets. MTA is asking for $32 billion for our transit nationwide. Amtrak is not making a special request out of this. I would think that they should, but they have chosen not to. On reauthorization, the big kahuna is the bill that passed the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in the last several weeks, called the Moving Forward Act. It makes changes to the existing programs. One of the programs that was kind of tilted towards the Northeast Corridor gets changed into the Prime program. And they would, suggest that we spend $15 billion over 5 years for that. CRISI, which is eligible for any railroad project in the country, is eligible for CRISI for the most part, $7 billion, and a substantial increase in the proposed spending levels for Amtrak. And a lot of policy changes. Their focus on how to improve the relationship with the railroads in this bill is more towards sticks, whereas we would like to see a lot more carrots. But this is an exciting bill. If it passed as is, we would be thrilled. And then these other three, other important bills, and a lot of times in the process, you introduce a bill not because you think that bill is going to be passed, but it's part of formalizing the discussion of what the bill should be. So Representative Moulton has been our lead champion on high-speed rail. Very excited about that. He has suggested a $240 billion project over 5 years. That's exactly what we should be spending on railroads. He wants to emphasize those segments of 186 and above, but also provides a lot of resources for the shared use lines. And he is saying, well, maybe we should make it easy for railroads to sell rights of way so that states can then upgrade those to high-speed standards. Recently, Senator Blumenthal and in my part of the world, Representative Davis introduced the Intercity Passenger Rail Trust Fund Act. That would be a trust fund specifically for Amtrak. We would like to see that wrapped into a bigger program, but again, a huge step forward. And Representative Costa from California has proposed substantial improvements to the RIF fund that would focus on electrified high-speed rail. And again, we're very happy about that. So that's kind of where the debate is over reauthorization. A lot of moving parts, a lot of steps have to happen to get to the end game, but we're off to a good start. And there's some questions that fit into the end. Nothing about this section. Okay. And then the last piece is the 2021 appropriation, which again, very, very positive news. This has made it through the Appropriations Committee of the House and will be voted on in the full House, they hope, next week. They did an interesting thing here where they split it into two sections. There's kind of the normal section at the normal amounts. And so the Northeast Corridor Fund and the two funds that Amtrak gets funds through, the Consolidated or CRISI program, which is that program that is very flexible, and then that federal state partnership, Partnership for State of Good Repair, which that other bill would change to the prime program at $200 million. Good thing that these continue to have funding, not really enough to make progress, but enough to at least we're not falling behind that much. But the exciting part of this was down at the bottom. Incredibly flexible money in these programs in order to move forward with passenger rail. It ends up being about $10 billion for Amtrak and another $5 billion if you total it all together. And again, we need a little bit more than this, especially since a lot of this will go to recovering from the financial squeeze that COVID is creating, but a huge, huge step. And Amtrak has said that this would keep them from cutting service on their core network trains, the long distance sleeper trains that actually provide the core of their services and have held up the best during COVID. They're proposing to cut those in something that we feel is very misguided, cutting them from 7 trains a day down to 3 trains a day. They have stopped the rhetoric on this in order to promote these amounts, and we think that works well together. Any questions on this segment? And to Scott, no. We don't have any real clues on what the Senate would take up for the rail title, but that's certainly something we need to work on. It will probably be less aggressive than the House, but there's opportunities. Okay. And then someone raised their hand. I'm going to admit I don't know how to use that. If you could put your question in, I'll see it. So here's how you can help. The biggest thing we need to do is just make it clear. Anybody, this has been a discouraging business to be in because we make a lot of progress once every 10 years and we don't quite make it work. And so we need to make it clear, anyone who has said they wanted new passenger trains, or if you run into people that say, oh boy, I took that train in Europe, I wish we could have it here, why don't we have it here? Anybody who wants trains, now is the most important time to get involved. So the legislation that we need to pass may not pass this year, but the fight over what that legislation looks like happens now. And we need everybody to be engaged in telling Congress to get involved. The way they can get involved initially is to sign a petition that we'll talk about later, but that puts them on their mailing list. And we then keep them informed and keep you informed as we move forward. The other thing you can do is, one thing that's an advantage of this new way of doing business is that we can do presentations anywhere in the country now at a very short notice. So if you have any kind of civic group that's looking for a presentation, we can tailor it specifically to their needs. And I came in this weekend, or during this week, I came in for a 3:30 meeting so I could talk to some folks in Asia. You get a big enough group, I'll meet at any time. So on our About Us, there's a Contact Us form. If you have a group that you think would be interested in a presentation about what's happening, please let us know. And then take action and spread the word as much as you can, as we discussed. And David Phillips, thank you for pointing that out. 7 trains a week. Today, for the long distance trains, Amtrak is proposing to cut to 3 days a week, which we think would be disastrous. The fiscal support for commuter rail, I'm sorry we forgot to put that in, but in the there was something in the appropriation, emergency funding for transit. Clyde, I would prefer to give the presentation live to your groups. The International Union of Railways is more of a trade group as opposed to an administration, Eric, so they probably should not be integrated together, but certainly they should cooperate. And I think a lot of people benefit from high-speed rail, and we certainly can spend our money differently than we have now. I would certainly have different priorities for many of our spending programs. But certainly everybody would save a lot of money if we had high-speed rail, and we need to figure out how to capture that. Okay. So here's the petition, and Dylan will put the link into the chat group. But I set a goal of getting to 10,000 when we started this. I still think we need to get there. I know that we can get there. We've been doing a lot of investment into understanding how to find new people through social media and online marketing. We did a YouTube, three YouTube videos that were very fun as a test. The first was I found that a very popular video blogger was taking a trip from Chicago to Seattle. So we sponsored his trip and was just thrilled with the response that had. Thousands of signatures came in because of that. And then he also, for other reasons, did a trip from London to Leeds on the new 125 mile per hour Azuma trains. We sponsored that with great response. And we had tentatively scheduled for March a really cool tour of the construction at California high-speed rail that we were really excited about. And we decided to postpone that. In between the time that we postponed it and the time it was scheduled to happen, they actually did close the border. But we said, you know, they might close the border. But we would like to do a lot more of that. And that's part of this, getting a lot more people into the audience. It doesn't make immediate returns on the investment. It makes long-term investments in terms of our actual revenues. So if you would like to sponsor a video or some other social media advertising, that's one way that you can really help spread the word. Or on a simple matter, just help us get the word out about this petition. Again, that puts people out on, gets people onto our mailing list so that we can keep in touch with them. Let me look at time. There's something I would like to know before we order these. Would you like a shirt like this? And we have a blog that has a poll about what size you want. If we get to a threshold of people committing to get them, we will order them, and then they would take a couple of weeks to come in. So if you go to our blog, hsrail.org/blog, and fill out that form, if we want a shirt and we get enough people to say yes, we'll order one. And then another way that you can help is, over the years, I've tried to, we as a group have created visual images that hope to show this excitement about what high-speed rail can be in the States. This was the first one. You know, we wish Union Station had been built this way and there were high-speed trains coming into Union Station. But this kicked off a poster series and some other artwork. You can have the original artwork on your wall. We're going to be, for members, for the first 2 weeks, there's a specialized web page that's not linked from our website. And you can just go ahead and get it first. And if there's anything left at the end of that, hopefully there's not, but if there is, we'll open it up to eBay in the next 2 weeks. But if you go to that website, you can see all the artwork that we've done. A lot of it's really cool. I put a high price on the one of the high-speed trains coming into downtown Chicago along the lakefront, because I want to keep it in my office, but there's that. So that's a quick overview. If there's any more questions, I'd be happy to take them. And now I can see the chat. Are there any more questions? So we've got Bill Porter has asked about the impact of high-speed rail on environmental sustainability. The high-speed rail has this huge impact. Not only is the high-speed rail right-of-way only 50 feet wide, where a highway right-of-way is 100 or 200 feet wide, and you've got all the water impacts off of that. You've got the pollution impacts from the rubber coming off the tires. You've got a long list of impacts that cars bring. Plus, it drives secondary impacts because it drives much more walkable communities. So the more we can get people into trains and buses, the much better off we are environmentally. We've done some studies on what that would actually impact, and we can do a future thing on that if folks would like. We will have the recording available on the website. I am really encouraged by a couple of things at Amtrak. One is the agreement that they've put together with Texas Central for interlining at Houston and Dallas. That's a great step. The new Acela trains will be a huge step forward in terms of how you run a high-speed train in a rough North American environment. I've also been very excited about them making proposals for new services around the country. They haven't been very open about it, but the ones we've heard of are Tucson to Phoenix, Front Range in Colorado, Ohio, and some others. Oh, Nashville to Atlanta. It's been disappointing, though, that they're only proposing typically 3 trains a day and very slow service. We think that they should be much more aggressive in these new corridors that they're proposing. And with Caltrain and California High-Speed Rail committing to full green electricity, I don't have the direct access to that. Answer to that, I know that they're leaning that direction. And should airlines negotiate code sharing between HSR with high-speed trains and Amtrak service? And absolutely yes. And the governments in Europe are actually causing this to happen actively right now. So if the airlines took COVID relief money, they have to work aggressively with the National Railroad to convert short flights to rail, and that's already well underway. Someone would like me to point out that on the primary trunk lines, and in fact, there are conventional lines that if the service is fast enough and frequent enough, they actually generate an operating surplus, and in a lot of cases, return an investment on the infrastructure. Part of the problem that we have right now in passenger rail is that we haven't taken it to a high enough scale. So because you're only running, say, 5 trains a day between Chicago and St. Louis, you're not attracting enough passengers. You're not making good enough use of the crews and the rolling stock. Costs are higher than they should be. If you can speed it up a little bit and run the trains more frequently, you can get to the point where you cover your operating costs. And I think that's it. And Kyle is asking, oh, the trunk and branching diagram on the back of a t-shirt, and have it as a t-shirt instead of a polo shirt. Kyle, that's a great idea. I will look into that. And for the American Rail Club, absolutely, we would love to partner with you. And if there's any question that I have missed, Roger Huff, if I've missed your question, put it again in the question and answers, and we will wrap this up in a couple of minutes. But Roger Huff has asked for an update on Union Station in Chicago, obviously a critical piece of the national passenger rail network. We've been frustrated at the very slow rate of progress there. And I apologize that we don't have a good update on what's happening on that. It's been very disappointing that it hasn't been moving forward the way we would like it to. So any more questions? Going once? Going twice? Richard Trask, did you ask a question up at the beginning? Richard Trask asked about Chicago to Twin Cities high-speed rail. Consistently in studies, that shows up as the best high-speed rail line if you do just city pair to city pair in the Midwest. It's about the distance of Madrid to Barcelona, which they do in 3.5 hours right now, 2.5 hours. Unfortunately, it's 3 states, which makes it a little bit harder to get moving than the others. So thank you very much for everyone for participating. We've got another one coming up soon. If you haven't signed the petition, sign it now. And get your friends to sign the petition. And if you have more comments, we'd be happy to talk to you on the phone or fill out the comment form on our website. Thank you very much.